screen.
Yep, you are live now, so I'm going to let you take it away. I can see your screen just fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Demystifying Critical Pedagogies, where practice meets theory. I'm Dr. Stacy Johnson, and we are talking in general about engagement, which I will extend to motivation and therefore stronger learning outcomes. Of course, we want to increase engagement with our students so that they ultimately are learning. And this is, engagement is very much linked to critical pedagogies as they foster that sense of engagement, that sense of motivation, and then ultimately our expectation is an increase in those learning outcomes, those positive learning outcomes that we're looking for. So I am going to drop into the chat a link that you're going to need. You don't need it right now, but I'm going to ask you to go to a survey in a few minutes. And so I just want to make sure that everybody has that link. And I'm also going to go off camera so that you don't have to look at my face and also try to look at the screen for the slides. So let me go off camera and then we will get on with things. Okay, so let's see if this scenario sounds familiar to anybody. Okay, got to get this lesson plan done. Let's see. Okay, so our state standards, that'll be our state standards. We want to analyze how character motivations and behaviors influence events and resolution of conflict, literary conflict, so that looks good. All right, so for their starter, we'll do a quick write to discuss a moment when their own behavior directly affected an event. So no way that's going to take 3 minutes. I'll give them 5 minutes for that, and they just need their journals. And then our review we'll do in whole group, and they can review how we talked about setting influences, the beliefs and values of a character, and they can tie that into their starter. That's a lot to do, though. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's going to, let's see, they're going to need images of various settings on the screen in order to review that, and that should take 15 minutes to get all of that done. Okay, my objective, students will be able to, that's right off the state standard, that looks good. And then, okay, into our new lesson. So the literary material, I'll do a choice of a news clip, a song, or a short story. And for their guided practice, they can work in groups and choose which literary genre their group wants to do. That's good for student voice. Got that in. And hypothesize an outcome. So that would be good. And then for their independent practice, once we've gone over that, they can create a multimodal that details the book that they're reading and talking about the prominent characters and how their behaviors incite an outcome. So that'll work. Just between the two of those, let's see. They're going to need laptops. They'll need their headphones, Dropbox access in order to get to the literary material. They will need also Google Jamboard access, which everybody has. Okay, that's good. And that'll take me like 30 minutes. Okay, that looks good. And then we can work on the close. Oh, shoot. I forgot about Bloom's taxonomy. I don't know where this falls on Bloom's taxonomy. We're supposed to do that. I suppose it's analyze, evaluate. So that's good. It's upper level Bloom's. I'll be well supported for that one. And then, oh my goodness, I have no idea whether I used any of my verbs to make sure that I'm in the upper level Bloom's. I'm going to have to get those verbs in there. And oh my gosh. Yeah, we're also supposed to get an SEL activity in, so I guess I'll do the rose, thorn, and bud activity. And gosh, in order to do that, that's going to take 15 minutes. That's putting me over my time. I don't know how I'm going to get this in. I have to shorten something. And then, oh gosh, of course, I've got to have a growth mindset. I guess I can do that at the beginning and talk to them about making mistakes and that mistakes we learn from them, or maybe I can put it at the close, like do an exit ticket or something. But then I don't know how I'm going to get this in, because if I put the SEL in there, that's an extra 15 minutes I don't have. So how in the world I'm going to have to throw something in order to get the growth mindset in. Oh my gosh, good Lord. I don't know. And then is any of this culturally relevant, or is it culturally responsive, or are they the same? Are they different? Or then there's culturally sustaining. I'm not even sure where that fits in the puzzle. Oh my gosh. How am I supposed to get all this in my lesson plans?
So clearly, Mrs. Mindboggled is frustrated in the confusion between all of these to-dos, all these boxes she has to check, and the theory is there, but what about the practice, trying to get it into practice? And of course, we have all of these activities that we are supposed to engage in with our classes that are coming from the district, and we're supposed to get all of this stuff in sometimes, and it just feels completely overwhelming as to how we are supposed to do that. Typically, teacher prep programs and continuing ed programs don't spend a whole lot of time helping us to learn how to infuse these things in our lessons. And so I am curious how you all are feeling about putting critical pedagogies into practice in your learning space. And so now I'm going to ask you to go on to that survey. Go ahead and open up that link that I put in the text box. And it's, I think it's 3 questions. If you'll just answer those, I can see the results populating. And then we can figure out just where we are with regard to this topic. So go ahead and fill that survey out for me. It'll take you about 2 minutes. Okay, so what I'm seeing on my end, it looks like we have everybody in the excited and hopeful category, which is good. I'm very glad to hear that, because it means that we're somewhat comfortable and feel like we can be successful at that. So that is very good to know. It just so happens that Gloria Ladson Billings, who is the scholar who conceptualized culturally relevant pedagogy, she has some frustrations herself, specifically related to the way that culturally relevant pedagogy, and again, culturally relevant, culturally responsive, and culturally sustaining pedagogies are all anchored in critical pedagogies. And so the mainstreamed version of culturally relevant pedagogy is pretty far away from her original concept, and therefore the research outcomes, which are predicated on that concept being intact, are not likely to create the kind of outcome that it was intended for. And so she has really 2 strong areas that she is frustrated when it comes to putting these concepts into practice. The first is that critical pedagogies valorize, they value their students and support their identity, their self-determination, and their self-efficacy. The self-determination piece is like the wind underneath our students' wings. It is the our influence in the classroom, helping those students to feel empowered, that they can shape their future and that they can do that successfully, that they can see themselves down the road successful, and feeling like they're in a good place in that way. And self-efficacy is a little bit different. Self-efficacy is the feeling that success in that particular academic subject matter is intrinsic to who they are. So if I were to give an example, as an African American woman sitting in a math class, do I feel that, well, Black people are not good at math, and so therefore I'm not going to be good at math, or girls aren't very good at math, and I don't know any girls who have been contributory in the field of mathematics, and so I'm probably not going to do very well in this class? Or do I feel the other way around? Do I have a high sense of self-efficacy and feel that I have every reason to believe that I'm going to be successful in this classroom because African Americans have been contributory to the math field for ages, or because women have been very present, and I even know a couple of icons who have contributed greatly to the math field. That would be my positive sense of self-efficacy. A low self-efficacy is directly linked to low engagement, low motivation, and then of course poor learning outcomes. And of course this would be because your student would disengage. They do not feel like they have any reason to be successful, and so they disengage from the learning environment. And so critical pedagogies help to valorize those aspects of the student, their identity, their self-determination, and their self-efficacy. So specifically, when we're talking about identity, identity is complex. It is not an issue of the foods that students eat and the few heroes that we celebrate, and costuming. Although those things are important, they actually have a low emotionality when we consider identity on the grander scale. In fact, through my research, it was almost heartbreaking listening to the students who were interviewed discussing how frustrated they are, where they're studying Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks almost every year. They did it in elementary school, they did it in middle school, and now they're doing it again in high school. And other students, Cesar Chavez being the only representation of influence, on a positive influence on her society, and having to study that multiple times, as if there's nobody else who has been highly contributory to society. So we actually are doing the students a disservice by thinking that, well, if I just give them a moment to talk about their foods and their costuming, and a couple of heroes that keep repeating themselves, that I'm actually engaging in these critical pedagogies. You're really not truly doing much more than scratching the surface. And so we look at identity as being something very complex and dynamic. It is not static. Identity shapes and reshapes. Your students are in flux. And so if you look at the chart, you can see several markers that all kind of play into identity. And identity kind of sits here at the center, at the intersection of these multiple identities, multiple experiences, and is vastly influenced by family, and by maybe the high contact community that is around that family. That shapes the student's identity. And then, of course, we have what we call outer ecologies that also play into the student's identity. Outer ecologies like the media, like the learning environment, school. And what happens is in these outer ecologies, and for our purposes, school, when the learning space is in contention with their identity that's coming from their central ecology of kind of worldview formation, what ends up happening is that student is sitting there in a state of stress, fight or flight. And when the student is experiencing fight or flight, it disrupts the cognitive process. Therefore, we are dismantling engagement and motivation and therefore inhibiting their learning outcome. So it is important that we learn who our students are, so that instead of being in contention with that central ecology, in contention with their ways of knowing and ways of being and their value system, that we actually are supportive of that. So that brings me to the second concern, which is that it is not critical pedagogy without the critique of society. Critical pedagogies empower students to identify and critique social inequities. The students are members of a democratic society, and they know that. The issue becomes whether it's a democratic society only on paper or in practice. And the students need that space to be able to examine their real world. And again, the academic program should support their real experience. They really understand that there are inequities out there in the world, that there are issues to resolve. And so without the space to examine that the inequitable power and privilege that we experience in society, it's not critical. It's no longer critical pedagogies. It's something else. I don't know what that is, but it's not critical pedagogies. And so our students need to have that space to be able to feel like their academics is for something. It is valuable. It is of worth to them, because it helps them to start to treat the issues of society, to problematize them, to analyze, to possibly come up with resolutions together as a classroom community. All of that kind of pulls us closer to the idea of critical pedagogies and what should happen in the classroom. So if we look at specifically culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally relevant pedagogy, they actually have quite a bit of overlap. Culturally relevant pedagogy is just kind of more succinct, I guess, in explaining the to-dos of the pedagogy. But if we look at them side by side, you can see the point is that we need to set high expectations with our students and let them know that we are committed to them. We are invested in them. We're not just leaving them out there hanging with their high expectations, but we're walking side by side with them because we believe in them. We engage in that cultural knowledge and experience and contributions and perspectives in a way that is multidimensional. And of course, again, for us to try to do all of that work, that is something we just cannot produce all of that with 30 some students with multiple classes a day. So there are ways that we get that done without putting the entire burden on our shoulders to know every last one of those intersectionalities of every last one of our students. We want to bridge those gaps between home and school, as I said, and educate the whole child instead of concentrating or having the students feel like the sum total of their education is to bubble in a circle on the standardized tests. That is very frustrating to students and again, this is coming through my research, for students to feel like the only thing that they are actually learning how to do is to bubble in a standardized test, as opposed to feeling some sense of real education, that there's something that they're gaining that's going to help them to be successful in their adulthood. We need to give the students that message that, yeah, okay, the standardized tests, they're important and we need to prepare for them, but that we are helping them to formulate ideas and notions and understandings that are going to help them over the long run, and that we're not just about the academics, that we understand that part of our students' identity is that they are social, they are emotional, emotional, they are political, and that we make a space for all of those identities to come together so that we're treating the whole child and not just expecting only part of them to be present in that classroom, that being only the academic side, as if it's unrelated to the other areas of who they are. We want to use the students' strengths to help to drive instruction. Yes, we want to learn how to give up a little bit of control and allow the students to collaborate with you as the educator to help to even build their own curriculum, to help the assessment process, to help the pedagogical practice that is their learning community. We have this kind of old-fashioned way of looking at education from this top-down kind of vantage point, in which the teacher knows all and just spoon feeds knowledge into the brains of his or her student. That's antiquated. What we're understanding now is that we want to have more of a horizontal approach. And absolutely, if you're engaging in critical pedagogies, you're going to have to get away from that top-down approach and get on a more horizontal plane, so that you are collaborating with your students. You're inviting their voices into the classroom, and therefore those identities will become present the more we involve our students in the learning process. One of the things that is a little bit different about culturally relevant pedagogy is the idea that not only do we need to valorize who that student is, but we also need to admit to our student that we need to learn to code switch a little bit, because there is a world out there, and the world speaks a type of a common language, and you can even investigate how fair that is, and is it equitable or inequitable. Those are conversations that you can have. But the bottom line is that we want our students to be successful, and so we want to support them in who they are, and we also want to teach them to survive in the world, because we want their success. And so we've got to teach them how to code switch between what I might call the kind of home community worldview and the professional world, and what kind of skills they will need in order to be successful there. And so that is unique about culturally relevant pedagogy. So critical pedagogies are not add-ons. We can't think of them as and that includes SEL. There are many aspects of SEL that actually overlap with critical pedagogy. So when you're doing the one, you're doing the other. And we want to infuse these things into the lesson. So it's more like a diffusion, where you have dye and you have water, but they're not two separate entities in diffusion. It becomes one almost new thing, where the critical pedagogy infuses into the lesson plan. It doesn't lengthen the lesson plan specifically, but it just reshapes how we get done what we need to get done to meet the state standards and to meet the burden of criticality in the classroom. So think of it more as a diffusion. So it begins with relationship. And I can tell you, research-wise, this bears out, and experientially for me in my career, and I had a 30-year career, I understand this to be true. Paulo Freire is one of the fathers of critical pedagogy. And from his standpoint, also from mine, in the absence of a profound love for the world, for life, and for those students in your classroom, it's going to be almost impossible for you to pull off critical pedagogies within your classroom. Students have to be able to trust you. You're not even going to have a good window into their identity if they don't trust you. And so you must build those relationships. And again, they don't even want you to be their best friend. So we're not saying that we need to become the best friends of our students. That's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that mentorship role, that facilitator role, where students know that you are fully, wholeheartedly invested in them. I used to tell my students, I am your mama for 50 minutes a day. I am wholeheartedly invested in you. I'm going to walk with you. I see brilliance in you, and my job is to get it out of you. And I would just start my relationship there. So an authentic, transparent relationship with your students is going to go a long way for engaging in critical pedagogy in your classroom. So I'm going to give you a for example. This is not my son. He would hurt me if I actually put his real picture there, but this is an image that is kind of a near look for my son. And he's in his master's program for English literature, has known this professor for quite some time, and they were in discussion in class during which he revealed that he was African American, which I'm sure stunned folks because they were probably assuming he was Latino or he was Middle Eastern or something. So now it turns out he's African American. Almost immediately after, his professor recommended a piece of literature that he thought he would really enjoy, and that was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Colson Whitehead, as it turns out, is an African American author. And the takeaway for my son was that this professor has done almost nothing to really get to know him. And the moment that he said that he was African American, the professor suggested literature by an African American author. And that incensed my son. And he understood that the professor wasn't trying to hurt him. He was actually trying to do a good thing, but he didn't know his student. In actuality, Herman Melville's work is more in concert with what my son enjoys. And so he, having gotten to know him, would know that really the recommendation should have been Moby Dick and not Underground Railroad. So these things, they happen. They are very difficult to reverse once we offend a student this way. But sometimes it happens. So it is so important that you get to know them. Otherwise, you will accidentally stereotype them, or broad brush or essentialize is the term that we use at the in research and whatnot. We don't want to do that. So this is something that I use that's a little helpful to start to get to know your students and to help your students get to know each other as you're building that community in your classroom. And it's an I am from poem, and it's a template. And what the students do is, where you see the bold in parentheses, that's where they insert things that are important to them. So the poem would read something like, if I were writing this for myself, I would say, I am from pots and pans, from sofa cushions and dog toys, something like that. And they continue to fill this out, and it allows them to tell you what they want you to know about them, and in a fun way, and opens up the possibility of greater conversations. And you can have them share their poems with one another in small groups. You can get volunteers to share in a large group, or you can do what is my preference, which is the gallery walk, in which you post all of the poems up around the classroom and you give your students sticky notes, and they can roam around the classroom just willy-nilly, and they can read the poems of their classmates, and they put comments where they really connect with what the student is saying or enjoy it, or things that are positive feedback, and they stick those sticky notes on the poem so that when the student goes to retrieve their poem, they have not only their poem, but they have the sticky notes of their classmates. And it just starts to build that empathy and connection, things that make a safe place, and a safe place is absolutely necessary when you're going to have critical conversations. So to Mrs. Mindboggle's lesson plan. She actually had a pretty decent lesson plan. And again, we're talking about diffusion. We're not talking about a bunch of add-on that should lengthen or make the lesson plan impossible. So on her class starter, she could have simply added a little bit of an extra question. What is it about the setting you were in or who you are, your identity, that may have impacted your behavior? And if this teacher, if Mrs. Mindboggled was someone who's been working SEL with the class throughout the year, part of the discussion can be, and what have we learned about de-escalating our behavior, our feelings, so therefore our behavior. That's something that could be brought in. With the review, just again, a small tweak on the review. What is the value of hearing each other's stories? This again starts to cause students to think about the value of different perspectives in helping them to understand the world, understand one another, and again helps to build that empathy in the classroom and mutual support. The objectives are the objectives. Our state standards are what they are, but there's no reason that you can't add something on to make sure that you are dealing with the criticality of critical pedagogies. And so the small add-on is, and the ways in which these motivations and behaviors might be influenced by social inequities. It's not a large conversation necessarily. It can head you towards an ultimate project, but it starts to open up the space to start to treat some of these things that are important to your students and in many ways concerning to them. And so just kind of last comment here, maybe with the literature material, instead of the teacher, Mrs. Mindboggled, providing a news clip, a song, and a short story, perhaps she provides a diverse selection of those things from which the students can choose, or lets the students know a couple of weeks ahead of time, hey, we're going to be doing this, this, and this, and I would like you to find a news clip, a song, a short story, bring it in, we're going to put it in Dropbox, and then you brought your students into the dialogue to allow them to kind of drive this. And if you notice, Mrs. Mindboggled had her students reading their own piece of literature, a selection of their own choice. So still dealing with the state standard, still treating the objective, but allowing the students an opportunity to bring in who they are, what they are interested in through a selection of their own literature. And so that brings me to our number one, which is outside of getting to know our students and building that relationship with our students, we need to allow our students choices. We need to allow them to help us to create the assessment program and let them choose. Do they want to do a project? Should it be individual? Should it be a group? Do they want to just take a normal run-of-the-mill exam? Do they want to do a speech? Do they want to do an essay? We can open it up and have them help us to formulate our assessment program. And we lose no authority in doing that. Also, if it's a history lesson, if we're dealing with a historical time period or icons that we're studying in certain certain events in history, allow the students to look at that event or look at those icons from a different perspective. Allow them to choose some figures or choose some events that are going on at the same time and are related and connected to your objective and what you're bringing into the classroom. Let them enjoy that link from just a different perspective. And even from science, we often think this is going to be hard to do this in science and math, but the students live in the real world. And so the phenomenon that we're looking at in math or in science, they probably have an experience with it. So let them make those connections. Let them talk about how they see that phenomenon from their vantage point. Again, we want to make sure that our academic program is something that is meaningful and valuable, and specifically so to each of our students. So give them an opportunity to choose. One of the things that I like to use for choice is a choice board. And this does take some time and a little bit of creativity to create. But once you kind of get the hang of it, it becomes a little bit more normal. If I were teaching math, and I would give the students a choice of just doing that typical exercise, 10 problems for me, 1 through 10, area and perimeter maybe. But then I would give them some other options, so that they would, in this particular case, have 2 assignments that are due at the end of whenever the due date is. So they might do the 10 problems, but they also might go into their home and measure 10 things that have to be different measurements. You can't use the measurements, over again. I can set the parameter as the educator to make sure that no rigor is lost between doing the 10 problems and doing some of these other things. So you do have that control. Have them walk around their community and observe the geometry of their community, and they snap those pictures and give the measurements, and they still have to work those problems. Same thing with a short story. And this allows students to have to meet the rigor of the objective, while at the same time giving them some choices as to how they might like to approach that. Number 2 is give your students the mic. They are much more knowledgeable than we think that they are often. There is nothing wrong with a review. You back off, give them the marker or the keyboard to the smartboard, and let them do the review with the class. Does anybody feel very confident in reviewing with the class the information that we went over yesterday to start to make a bridge into what we're going to do today? And that student comes up, and that student can even call on their mates to contribute to the review. They love talking to each other. And again, they really do feel valued when you do that. Questioning techniques like asking, what do we know about this? Why is this important to our society, our community, our family? How can this knowledge help us to improve our future, our society, etc.? Does this moment in time, or this text, or whatever it is you're working on, does this represent diverse perspectives? Why does it? Who's included? Who's erased or silent? Who's not here? Why are diverse perspectives important? Can you give any examples of innovators or contributors, people who made a difference in this particular area? You can see that this questioning technique helps us to introduce those critical pedagogies into the learning space, and allow the students to make these real connections between, again, who they are and their worldview and their communities and the academic program. Number 3 is do not lower the bar. We have this idea that if we feel like our students are going to struggle, we need to lower the bar because we want them to feel good about themselves. We want them to feel successful. It is very counterintuitive, but actually what we're ending up doing is we're sending a signal to our students that we do not believe in them, that we don't have confidence in them. And so we're actually doing the opposite of what we are intending to do. We need to raise the bar, not lower the bar, but not raise the bar and just leave them out there to struggle. You raise the bar with the message, I am with you in this, and I have high standards for this class, high expectations for you, and yes, I'm going to push you, and I'm going to make you uncomfortable sometimes, but it is because I know how brilliant you are. I believe in you. I want you to have a bright future, and so it is my job to pull that greatness out of you. and I'm going to be here with you every step of the way. I am not going to abandon you. I'm going to walk with you until you are successful and you can turn back and look and see what you've been able to accomplish. That's the message that goes with Lift the Bar. There was a scholar who had in her book that she had written out of her research that one of the teachers called her, I think they might have even been in kindergarten class. They were really, really lower elementary. She called them scholars. And it was amazing to see how those students performed for her, because it made them feel good to be called scholars, and to have a teacher who expected them to perform like scholars, not because she was hard-nosed, but because she believed in them. So you raise the bar, you raise them. The last one is, to the best of your ability, try to arrange your units around real issues. You can even ask your students to choose those relevant issues. Again, they understand phenomenon. It's happening every day around them. So to ask them to allow them to contribute to those issues is really, that's the best of the options. Outside of that, if you need to choose real issues. And so when I was teaching Spanish at my last teaching assignment, I chose the textbook Puntos de Partida, because this particular textbook did just that. The vocabulary was supportive of ultimately a discussion around certain socioeconomic issues, sociopolitical issues, just flat out social issues. And the students at the end of each unit, not only did they get the regular kind of exam, they had quizzes and exams, but they had a project that they sometimes did individually and sometimes did in groups. And it allowed them to address things that are on their mind anyway. And allow them to hypothesize a little bit, allowed them to create. It allowed them to consider how, if they were boss for the day, they might rectify the issue or improve it or whatever. And so it absolutely motivated the students, because they were interested in what they were doing, and they felt like memorizing all of this vocabulary and all this grammar had some purpose, and they were going to be able to use it for something real. So most important to your feeling successful is to not try to do this. Don't try to turn everything you're doing around at once, or to feel like, oh, I'm not meeting the expectation here because I don't have it in everything that I'm doing. Do what you can. The start is what is most important. And so you can do little things like just kind of tweaking how you do things so that you allow the students the mic a little bit more often. You can do those choice boards, but of course you're not going to do them for every lesson. You're going to maybe create one every 9 weeks, or find a way to kind of tweak one unit per 9 weeks. And then little by little, you start to tweak other things, and you're always kind of in this process of adjusting. And really best practice is to involve your students. Let your students know what you're doing, that you are trying to value them. You are trying to connect their academic program with their interests, that, just let them know what you're doing and ask for their feedback. They will love that. And absolutely, you are building trust with your students in allowing them to have a voice in your program. And with that, I will conclude and take any questions if there are any questions. Okay, well, if there are none, then I will just say thank you for your attendance and for your attention. And I hope that this was of some benefit to you. I'm sure that in the literature, there's contact information if you want to talk any further or get any more ideas or anything like that. I am certainly at your disposal. Oh, it looks like we might have something here. Okay. So we have one person asking, how do you bring these strategies to your school organization? That is a really good question. Honestly, my relationships with my principals, I have had the blessing and the benefit of having really good relationships with my principals, my administrators overall. So we had a relationship that was a trust relationship in actually most of the schools I've been in. And so they trusted me that I could see what the students needed. And so really it just started with a discussion. Just we would make an appointment with them and we would just sit down and discuss that I'm trying to improve their engagement, that I really am looking to increase those learning outcomes, and that usually tickles our administrators' ears, because really that's what they're trying to do as well. And so I would say start there. Hopefully you have an administrative staff that is supportive of you, where you can start to open up some of these discussions. Research is helpful as well. Any research that you can pull that can help them to see that this is actually beneficial will help you in the point that you're trying to make with them. So that would be my advice, would be to start with your administrators, because if it's necessary to get parent buy-on, they're going to need to be part of that. Also, if you have a department head, you may want to also include that department head in the meeting, just to make sure that everybody who ought to be involved is involved in making those decisions. Can I clarify the choice board activity? Is it for an assessment? I have never done a choice board as an assessment. I do think that that's interesting to do that, though, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. Again, you have control of the rigor. Because one student chooses to do a project and another student chooses to do a paper, I don't see why you could not pull that off. Most of the time I have used choice boards for lesson activities, but yeah, I think that would be brilliant to do that for an assessment. Then I also have a question. It was true. That's a statement. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Very much glad you enjoyed it. Any other questions? And again, my contact information is in your literature. You've got the handouts there. I tried to make sure I gave you something that you could take away, that you could use later on, or to help to just kind of start the idea wheels going. But feel free to contact me. We can dialogue further. I'm probably the most open person you could ever meet. So this is the chapter 2 of my life. I did 30 years in the classroom, and now I'm at the college level and invested in helping other educators to feel successful and enjoy their careers as much as I have enjoyed mine. In designing from student interests, how do we draw that from our younger students? Oh my goodness, they are so talkative. They love to tell you what's on their mind. So yeah, you could give, honestly, again, it's that transparency with them and saying, okay, this is what I am trying to accomplish. I want you to enjoy what you're learning, and I want it to feel like it makes sense to your lives. So these are the kinds of things that are on my mind. Does anybody have any suggestions? And you can pitch it to the younger kids just like you would to the older kids, and they will love to share their ideas with you. So absolutely. Actually, I find it harder to get the high schoolers to talk than the elementary kids. The high schoolers, it just needs a whole lot more priming. So, and thank you, Gabriella. I'm glad I was helpful. Okay, it looks like we are at time. We're at 11:50. So again, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk further. And I very much enjoyed being here with you. I wish that it were in person instead of virtual, but it's also good that we have this in this world that we're living in right now. So thank you all, and take care.